Hello, everyone. My name is Dana Taylor, and we want to welcome you to the first webinar for our four-part webinar series on food insecurity. And we want to thank you for taking the time to be with us this evening to learn more about this important and very relevant topic right now, given everything that's going on in the country. So as you all may know, National PTA is a membership organization, and we're comprised of millions of families, students, teachers, administrators, community organizations, leaders, businesses, all devoted to the educational success of children and the promotion of family engagement. We are definitely a powerful voice for children, a resource for families and communities, and an advocate for public education. So I wanted to first take care of some housekeeping items. As you all can see, we're using the GoToWebinar platform for our webinar series. And the platform, hopefully you guys might be familiar with it. When we do our webinars, we use two features. So you should see those features in a box on that's on your screen, and you all have been muted, so we can't hear you speaking. And in order to make things a little bit more easier and organized, you can send the questions in the questions box that you may have. We are going to be asking you some questions during the course of the webinar, and there will be also questions that we'll get to at the end. We'd also like you to use the chat box feature to share communications during the webinar. Stephanie, I'm going to stop right now. I think that we do not have the PowerPoint displayed, so I will continue to go through the introduction, but take a look at the PowerPoint and let's try to get that displayed. So as I mentioned, we are in the process of sharing our screen with you. And so you'll be able to see the PowerPoint shortly. We cannot see or hear you, and then you all will be able to see the PowerPoint.
Dana, I think we're good to go.
Okay, great. Yes. All right. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, so at this time, we are going to go ahead and use the chat box. So we would love to get some introductions going. So we'd love to know who is here on the webinar with us this evening. So if you can go ahead and use your chat box, let us know who you are. We'd love to know where you're from, what PTA or organization you represent, and of course, please provide your name. After my intro, hopefully we can go ahead and take care of some shout outs so that we can know who we have with us this evening. So again, my name's Dana Taylor. I'm going to be monitoring the webinar session this evening. I'm the Programs and Partnerships Manager here at National PTA. I'm responsible for providing valuable programs and resources to PTAs across the country. At the end of the webinar, I'm going to be sharing out some very important information on the opportunities that we currently have available for PTAs. And on the last note, I just want to let you all know that you're going to receive a follow-up email regarding the webinar, and that's going to include the webinar recording and brief webinar satisfaction survey. And I hope to get those materials out to you by the end of next week. And we're going to make the webinar available on National PTA's website as well. So Stephanie, do you want to, do we have any folks respond and tell us who they are and where they're from?
I do. I see we have some folks from New York. We have some folks from Oregon, Washington State, a couple of folks from Washington State, Seattle, and other places. We have some folks from Savannah, it looks like, in Georgia, Warren Township Council of PTAs, Missouri, Utah, Florida, Texas, New Hampshire, Virginia. So we have a really great showing from all across the country. So thank you all for joining us.
Awesome, great. All right, Stephanie. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to you. You all, Stephanie is our subject matter expert on the topic of food insecurity. She's also a health educator that we work with here at National PTA, and she's going to take it over and present and facilitate the webinar. Thank you guys for being here again.
Thank you, Dana. So I'm really thrilled to be a part of this webinar series, and thank you all so much for joining us for our first webinar in this series. So as Dana mentioned, I'm Stephanie Sims-Hodges. I am a consultant with National PTA on several healthy lifestyles initiatives and really passionate about improving food insecurity and reducing and preventing it. So on this webinar, we also have joining us Stephanie Ettinger-DeCuba from the Children's Health Watch, an organization that's doing a lot of really great work around children's health and wellness. So I will move on to our agenda next. Throughout this presentation, we're first going to speak to food security and the definitions of those. We're going to walk through the prevalence of food security and insecurity. We're going to talk about the intersection of food insecurity and health. And then, of course, top of mind right now, we're going to talk about food insecurity in the context of COVID-19, and then also what can we expect going forward. So I'm actually now going to turn it over to the other Stephanie and let her start her presentation.
Thank you so much. I'm really pleased to be with all of you tonight. This is Stephanie Ettinger-DeCuba. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Dana, for inviting me. It's great to be here. Yeah, so let's dive in. So as you can see on the slide, the definition of food security is when all people at all times have access to sufficient, safe, nutritious food to maintain a healthy and active life. So that's what we're all striving for. Next, we can click. This is a concept of a condition that's measured by the United States Department of Agriculture at the national level with the 18-question food security survey module. This is a survey that the USDA sponsors annually through the current population survey. And it has questions about running out of food, not having enough money for food, being concerned about food supply, whether people feel they're able to eat balanced or healthy foods, balanced meals and healthy foods, whether they have to cut the size of their meals, eat less, or whether they feel hungry. And if you're curious to learn more about those questions, there's a link there on the slide for you. And so the answer to this, it's a nationally representative survey, happens in all 50 states and Washington DC, of course. This set of questions allows us to determine different levels of food security or food insecurity more accurately. I wanted to talk a little bit about this because I think there's an important concept here. You can click once, Stephanie. Thanks. So marginal food security is when a person, a household answers one or two questions positively. So the thing about this is that we know that even at this very, very low level, this is like people, starting to worry about their food supply. Maybe they've run out of food once or twice. This is connected to very definite health outcomes, poor health outcomes, both physical and mental health for children and for adults. And yet, as a country, we don't actually track this separately. We'll learn more about that on the next slide, but this is actually counted at the national level within the numbers for food security, even though there is actually a large body of research demonstrating that this is a concerning level of food insecurity. So if we go to the next one, this is where we start to get the national numbers. This is household food insecurity. So this is like at the adult level with 3 or more questions answered positively on that survey. And then child food insecurity is a set of 8 child-focused questions, and the family's child food insecure if there are 2 or more child-focused questions answered positively. And as you can all imagine, adults try their hardest to protect children from food insecurity. So we know that when it gets to the level of child food insecurity, we're talking about real distress and stress in the household. So this is going back to this idea of marginal food security, and I just wanted to point this out. Obviously, this graph is only showing data through 2015. This is from our Children's Health Watch data of families with young children. But the point that I want to make here is that this marginal food security, this yellow bar, is not actually split out at the national level. So we miss this whole group of people. It's quite a number of people that we've dubbed hidden food stress. And we're seeing that, I think, now at the national level as well, just an enormous number of people struggling to access food. Go to the next slide. So here's some national statistics. I'm only showing you households with children. This was looking at all the way back to 1998, all the way up to 2018, which are our most recent numbers. You can see there's quite a spike over the Great Recession, and we're going to come back to that at the end of this presentation, but I do want you to notice that. And then our latest numbers before, obviously, the COVID pandemic, this is 2018 numbers, we had 13.9% of our households with children under the age of 18 that were household food insecure in this country, and 4.3% of them were child food insecure, also known as very low food security among children. There's more technical terminology at the USDA level. So that's millions of households that are then at risk of poor health outcomes. So that's what we're going to talk about next, what the connection between food security and health is. You can go to the next slide. So before I get into what the specific outcomes are, there's the really important concept to understand here, and that's the infection malnutrition cycle. So if we take, if we're talking about ourselves as parents, and your child gets sick and doesn't feel well, doesn't eat for a few days, maybe loses a little bit of weight, and then recovers from whatever infection or cold they have, and then I'm sure those of your parents have all observed it, they eat double and triple for a few days and put that weight right back on, and kind of get back to their normal selves. Well, but in a food insecure household, kids get colds and then they don't feel well, they don't eat, and then when they start to recover, there isn't that extra food available to sort of allow them to have those extra helpings, and maybe there's not even enough for them to have all the regular meals if they're really in a distressed household. So this actually has an impact on their immune system, and it weakens their immune system, and then they enter into this cycle where it's this pattern of a weakened immune system, insufficient nutrition, and then they get ill, and they're more likely to get ill, and they kind of spiral down and down and down. And so that's why we see, you just keep that in mind when we look now at the health outcomes. This is what's happening for our kids, and frankly, it happens for adults, and even more so for seniors as well. Next slide. So I divided this up by ages. We can just stop there. Oh, okay, that's fine. So in our youngest children in early childhood, we know that food insecurity is related to increased risk of poor health status, hospitalizations, developmental delays, and iron deficiency anemia. And why do I call out iron deficiency anemia? Because this is actually related to impaired brain development. So we know that when kids have iron deficiency anemia, it's impacting their brain growth, which is obviously happening very rapidly in early childhood. And then when we get to sort of more up to the kindergarten years, the sort of character of the impacts changes a little bit. You start to see impacts on school readiness, sort of ability to identify numbers and letters and those sorts of things. Their nutrition levels are lower. There's more stress. You can identify more stress in the kids. And then there's also related to mental and emotional health of both the child and the parents. And again, anybody who's a parent will know that, especially in the early years, all along, but particularly in the early years, the relationship between parent and child is really symbiotic. And so when parents are stressed, that affects kids. When kids are stressed, it affects parents, and there's a real connection there. As we get into the school years, you see increased risk of behavioral problems, trouble relating to peers, suicidal thoughts. Really, these are all related to food insecurity. More visits to the school nurse for stomach aches, headaches, colds, upsets. There's also evidence showing that there's a link to lower bone density for boys, particularly. And if you think about kids playing and participating in sports, that puts kids at higher risk for bone breaks. And then overall evidence of lower academic achievement and ultimately educational attainment, we see very specific relationships of food insecurity to math and reading scores. And then as you see here, all of the emotional side and the emotional well-being that we know is necessary to be successful in school. So teens we know are some of the most food insecure children. That's for two reasons. One, because they have large appetites, and two, because they're growing so much, and two, because at that stage, they tend to be quite aware of what's happening in their household. And if their household is food insecure, they may be holding back because of they're trying to hold on to food for younger siblings and that sort of thing. So that's obviously a concern. Some really newer evidence, wait, can we go back one second? When newer evidence is linking also food insecurity to asthma, and that's actually through a sort of a set of links. First being that their lack of vitamins is related to poor lung function, which then puts kids at greater risk of asthma. Next slide. So that you can click again. Yeah, the points I want to make here is just that there's really sort of a duality in food insecurity and the way that it affects us. One is very much nutritional, you know, the lower vitamin micronutrient levels, and that sort of very direct link through either low quality or inadequate quantity of food, or both. And then there's a very much an emotional and mental health side, which is stress, and also a link there, just like thinking about the economics of it, of having to decide between basic needs, like people delaying healthcare, which means that their health conditions get worse, and then when they do finally get care, things are more severe. And also just competing needs of like housing, utility, childcare, transportation costs, those sorts of things competing with food. Next slide. This is actually, I'm now switching gears to talk about the situation with COVID right now. So at the top, this table is looking at various scenarios. This is some simulations that came from Feeding America, some various simulations of what happens when the unemployment rate goes to this percentage, and then what does that mean for child poverty, and then what does that mean for child food insecurity. And in fact, they modeled 3 different scenarios, and we're really, frankly, moving very rapidly, if we're not already there, and to the red column, which is seeing 7-point increases in unemployment rates, 5-point increases in child poverty, and then 9-point percentage increases in child food insecurity. Our current unemployment rate, for context, is 13.3%, but last year in May, the unemployment rate was 3.6%. So, and the table on the bottom is really showing you what this means in numbers for both food insecurity and millions of children. So you can see that the projected child food insecurity rate is 24.5%, basically 1 in 4 children in the United States, up from 2018 numbers where it was 4%. And now we're looking at 18 million children experiencing food insecurity. Next slide. So these are, well, can we stop there? Yeah, thanks. These are 2018 numbers. Like I said before, 13.9% of households with food insecurity with children under 18, much higher with single female-headed households, almost 28%. And then there is very much an inequity across race and ethnicity with food insecurity, even pre-existing COVID and all the stresses that has brought on, with Black households having a rate of 21%, Hispanic households at 16%, and white households at just 8%. And now this is another bit of very new research. There's this new nationally representative study that happened during COVID-19. The survey was taken in March of this year, and they found with their numbers that nationally we're looking at a rate of approximately 38.3%, and that it's the highest in the Southeast, 41%, which is just like a terrifyingly high number when you think about the impact that it has on people's health and well-being. Next slide. And I don't want to neglect to talk a little bit more about food insecurity in the context of inequity, particularly racial inequity. This is some research that my group did published in 2018, looking at a validated set of questions called experiences of discrimination, which asks people how many times and about different settings, how many times they've experienced discrimination in those settings, particularly related to their race, ethnicity, color of skin. And sadly, unsurprisingly, these are two very interrelated experiences. This graph really shows you kind of in a U shape, the gray being food security and the orange and red being food insecurity, that on the left-hand side, you see much higher proportions of people who are food secure, having no problems with food, who have no experiences of discrimination. And as you move to the right and people begin to have more experiences of discrimination, you begin to see those proportions of food insecurity not only rise, but the severity rise. So that when you get to the far right and people have had 3 or more experiences of discrimination in their lifetime, they're much more likely to be experiencing child food insecurity, which again is the most severe level of food insecurity among families with kids. And you know, given all that's going on in our country right now, and the conversations that we are having as a nation, I think it's really important that we recognize this. And this is that food security and racial justice, frankly, are rights that are very much deeply intertwined, and addressing one means we have to address the other. Next slide. So going forward, where do we go from here? I think lessons from the Great Recession are very real. This is a slide from some research that my colleagues and I published. The blue line is families who participated in SNAP, and the yellow line is families who did not participate in SNAP. And we looked at trends over time from 2007 to 2013, so over the period of the Great Recession, which officially started December 2007 and ended April 2009. And you see that despite the fact that the recession was declared to be over in April 2009, that the food insecurity rates, in fact, kept climbing after the recession, and frankly did not drop until 2018. So these rates kept on going up, and I think it's just like this long ripple effect of folks who were struggling perhaps before the recession, and the huge increase in people who were struggling, and the fact that that recovery didn't actually reach the people who were at the lower to mid and lowest incomes for much longer after the recession ended. And so my concern now with COVID, given that there is really no particular end in sight until we get some really effective treatments and a vaccine, is these enormous rates of food insecurity that we're seeing are going to be with us for a long time. And so whatever we plan as a country, as people who care about kids, they have to be plans for the long term. This isn't a thing that's going to happen for 6 months and go away. We need to be thinking long term in these plans. And I know you're going to talk more about policies and what can be done in other webinars. So I'll leave it there so we have time for questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Stephanie. I know that was a lot of information, and I think it really helps to set the stage for this entire webinar series of what we hope to learn from each other and learn what we can all do to address these issues that aren't just happening at the national level, but in our communities as well. So we do have a few minutes for questions, and I want to open that up. So I did see a couple of questions come in, and I'm going to try to expand it so that I can see them a little better.
And Stephanie, I unmuted myself too, so I'm available if I need to step in at any point.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. So our first question that I see, if in SNAP, are you automatically enrolled in free and reduced lunch? And so I'm happy to address this. So a lot of states have it to where if you are receiving some sort of assistance such as SNAP or WIC or TANF in the household, that you're automatically eligible to receive free or reduced price meals. So that is something that would be done at your school nutrition at the district level. So yes, that does occur in the states that I'm aware of, which is good because it removes that barrier of having to fill out another application if your family is already receiving something like SNAP. And I think there were a couple more that came through. So if you have questions, you can enter those into the question box.
Stephanie, I think that our participants, they can just see the questions box. So all of the correspondence should come through the questions box. Even if anyone has a comment that they would like to make, go ahead and use the questions box.
Okay, and I'm scrolling up. It looks like we had a question submitted just a few minutes ago. There's a question about a SNAP reform bill and making families having to apply for free reduced lunch services at school. So I'm not sure exactly which bill you're referring to, but I'm happy to. Oh, go ahead.
I know what that is. Yeah, I can answer that one. Yeah, so that you're absolutely right. That was a proposal that would roll back that auto connection between SNAP and free reduced price meals for quite a few families. It is still under review, and part of one of the bills that actually has passed the House and is now being considered by the Senate, the HEROES Act, would actually block implementation of that rule change and all the other rule changes that the Trump administration has put forward around SNAP. There have been several. So that bill would stop that from going into effect, which would be great because that change would kick 1 million kids off of SNAP and then would decouple free and reduced price lunch for 1 million children.
Thank you. And then there's another question regarding someone, or it's more of a comment. I would like to plan for helping families with applications if needed. That's a great question, and thank you for offering to help with that. Because so much of the data and information that families submit, whether it's a free reduced lunch application or a SNAP application, is so personal and private, it's a little challenging to allow volunteers to help with that, but I'm sure there are other ways that you could be involved in helping and connecting at the district level to learn how to do so. Stephanie, I'm not sure if you have anything else you want to add with that.
Yeah, I think probably one of the ways to do it is most states have some kind of anti-hunger policy advocacy organization, and a lot of those folks have SNAP outreach, and some places, not all states, but some places have they do like volunteer training to help people with applications. So you might check into that in your state and see whether they do have the sort of SNAP outreach volunteers or free and reduced price lunch volunteers. So that could be one way. I also saw a question about asking about breaking the data down by county. Is that okay if I answer that one?
Yeah, absolutely.
So the national numbers don't have it broken down. Like the USDA numbers don't have food insecurity broken down by county, but Feeding America's come up with kind of an algorithm. It's not exactly the same definition as the USDA, but it is still a very useful number and really demonstrates that that food insecurity is present in every county in the United States. So that's one source that you could look to for a pretty close approximation of food insecurity in each county. The other one is the Food Research and Action Center also has a report that they put out that does a similar sort of thing of looking at basically food stress by county across the United States. So those would be two good sources for data.
Perfect. And that was actually our last question. And I know we're coming up on 6:30, so I'm going to go ahead and move to the next slide and let Dana wrap up with some announcements and reminders.
Great. Thank you so much. This is such great information and such a timely conversation. So I'm really excited about continuing in the webinar series. So as you see in the last bullet, we have a second webinar next week, Thursday, same time. This webinar has been extended to 6:45. So I just wanted to let everyone know that if you did sign up for the webinar for next week, that's going to be a session that'll go until 6:45. I also wanted to mention to everyone for our PTAs that are on the call, I wanted to let you all know about the opportunity that we have with TikTok to provide grants so that PTAs can support their school communities and really help families out during this pandemic time that we're in right now. So you're going to receive that information in the follow-up email as well. And in addition, the other opportunity that we have for PTAs right now is we have enrollment open for our School of Excellence program. And this information is on National PTA's website. And again, we'll be sharing this information with you all in the follow-up email that you'll receive related to this webinar session. So I believe that's it, everyone. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time. And we hope to engage with some of you again next week and then for the rest of the sessions that we have. Thank you so much for your time and have a good evening.